Okay, so next for a more, I guess, historical kind of question, right? So, there are some continuities from Secret Manta to Once the Dark Tower Comes. Like identify, attention to objects and images, use of illusions, shifting perspectives, play with language, and kind of rightly self-consciousness. But while Secret Manta is still grounded in familiar concerns, like whether it's family or local concerns, right? Dark Tower, it's more opaque, right? Yeah. And it's as if the linguistic and semantic concerns have now become, both style and substance. And to me, I guess that kind of trajectory mirrors the progression, I guess, from programmatic to non-programmatic music, for example, in 20th century, right? Or from figurative to non-figurative art. Before we dive deeper into the individual collections, could you just tell us about how your approach to poetry has changed over the years or remained the same?
Yeah, I think if you put it that way, it's true. Yeah, I mean, the Secret Mentor wasn't exactly the way I wanted it to be honest. It was published by Landmark. I had a editor called Leslie Yeow, who is not related to me. Yeah. So what she did was, at that time, was that she took out what I thought were the difficult poems. Yeah. So she kept more of the familiar yeah. So it became a collection that's really primarily about family, and which is fine. But it wasn't what I intended to be. It was meant to be called The Dumb Creatures, which has all the double play of the. It's based on a quote from Virginia Woolf about what she said, that we think of animals as the dumb creatures, but actually they can say a lot more. But I guess that's again a bit too esoteric. But anyway, it became very much more familial and family. But when it came to Pretend I'm Not Here, I was approached by Enoch from First Fruits, who read my. I think he read the August Moon in QRS. So, and of course the book, and he said that he would like to publish me. So at that time I moved because I thought that he's drawn to the so-called opaque poems rather than the transparent poems, if you're using that metaphor. And I thought, okay, let's just go with it. So Pretend I'm Not Here was me saying that I don't have to give a damn about trying to please anyone. I have to be myself. So I wrote, it's a combination of poems that I wrote even during the Secret Mentor days that never made it into Secret Mentor, but they were, and also poems which, I was already in the Straits Times at that time, so I was entertainment editor, was reviewing music, movies and stuff. And Pretend Not Here, I call it a collection based on the death of the author, as you may know, and the idea of you can be who you want to be in the absence of the person, the absence of the author, to pretend I'm not here. So it has that ironic thing. And then when it comes to One the Dark Tower Comes, so Pretend I'm Not Here is the absence, and so I like to sell it. And then One the Dark Tower Comes is the presence. Yeah. So that's only one way to look at it. Pretend I'm Not Here is also about the death of my grandmother, and yeah, that's my grandmother. But there was other deaths as well. And then One of the Dark Tower Comes, it's the death of my father. Yes. But essentially, they're both death obsessed. Okay, so in terms of what you just said about programmatic, programmatic, and whether it's more, I actually thought One of the Dark Tower Comes is, for me, is less difficult to access. Actually, I find that the frame is deliberately more discernible. Therefore, I think as a collection, I thought it was, I hate to say, I know it's controversial, but I thought it was actually easier to understand. But I meant understand in the sense that you can talk about it in terms of frame and structure, maybe not in terms of meaning per se. And I thought Pretend I'm Not Here was more chaotic. Yeah, was actually more like, I don't like a middle finger to structure and everything. And in fact, there was a series of poems called Memento Mori. Yeah, but I think, yes, this one is more, the latest is a little less, framework-wise, was more obvious. So actually, I disagree with your reading that this was the most difficult collection. Some people have told me, I don't know, some people have given me very conflicting things, but this is the first time I thought first thing that I heard that this was the most difficult. I actually thought it was that.
I wanted to jump in here more on a biographical point, but I love the phrase you just used. You said a middle finger to structure, something like that. so we should immortalize that quote. Okay, but I wanted to comment on a biographical point. In some ways, what Leslie Yeow did in Landmark for your book kind of reflects the times, right? Because and actually there's a question here about the times, because in some ways, your trajectory as a poet in Singapore is very much out of time, in the sense of when you were writing and publishing, your contemporaries were writing more lyrical works. They're writing more confessional, which makes Leslie Yeow's move to edit Secret Mentor in a family oriented. that sounds very weird, but in a familial way, understandable. So I wanted to ask really how you tell us a bit more about how you felt as you were writing through this journey, and when you were writing in a way to build on the alien artifact metaphor. You were an alien. You were an alien in this world of lyrical and confessional poets. How do you feel, and how in some ways has that evolved?
I mean, I wasn't published as a collection until 2001, but I was very active in the 1990s. I was part of the notorious 1995 Singapore Lit Prize shortlisted generation, if you know what I'm trying to say, because oh my god, I'm going to throw people under the bus again.
No, tell us more.
There was okay, without do your own research. There was somebody who won it that we didn't think deserved to win. The second prize person was Wei Kim Cheng, who I'm very happy to lost to, actually, to have lost to, but I was like, why this person who won? Not that I have nothing against him per se, but the collection wasn't. I knew that this collection will not withstand the test of time, but I knew right away that Days of No Name would be a classic. I was like, how is it possible that they can get it? They would get it so wrong. So anyway, I started writing in those times where it was quite pedantic to, like, in order to be a poet that is accepted by the establishment, meaning the universities, you have to write a certain way, because you need endorsement by certain people, because they will tend to write forward for you. Nothing wrong with that. I have nothing against that, because I was a lit student, so this were my prof, and I mean, so, but I knew right away that my poetry would be sidelined and marginalized. So I had to be grateful that I even got published by Landmark. Yeah. So my aim was I had to get published, right? And I didn't want to go into self-publishing, because then that means that's again, like, you will not be credible. And then at that time they published poetry books in trios. I don't know, you remember? They like to publish. I was published together with To Sian Min and another, I forgot her name, another poet. Anyway, that's what happened. So yeah, but anyway, so that was the time. What was the question again?
It's always, how did you deal with the loneliness? Go back to the question of the loneliness.
I wasn't lonely insofar as I hung out with all of them. They were friends. In fact, we all wrote very differently. Yes. Yeah, I think I felt the most like left out of all, in terms of the fact that there's no way I could share.
You're the most outlier.
I mean, I don't want to use such word, but basically we are friends, right? So they have seen my writing. I mean, sometimes I feel that they were just like, I'm the odd one out, but kind of like tolerate me. But so it's fine lah. I don't have any issue. So once I got published and I got feedback, and maybe some no feedback, or maybe I got a horrible review in the Straits Times. Yeah, but it's better to be reviewed than no review lah. Yeah. So, but I think Pretend I'm Not Here was when I started sensing the shift in the air. Like there were people who are reading, and there were people who are maybe not educated in a certain sort of like Anglo-American tradition. Well, I don't have anything against it, but more like they're not just reading dead white poets. They're reading all sorts of stuff. And I was educated. I did this course called Modern American Late 20th Century with a prof called Dr. Gilbert Adair, who introduced me to the groundbreaking works of American writings, Dos Passos and all those, like Donald Barthelme. Basically, a lot of fiction, but also poetry. And me and somebody else called Alfie Lee, who was my classmate, who's now in New York, started writing in that way, very meta, very language with a kind of, yeah. So all those schools of poetry, to be fair, I think these are traditional. To me, they are traditional. They are how many decades old? But in Singapore, it had never arrived at that point. But so I guess you're right. I know one of the questions was about my American inclination. But for me, just that the Americans seem to be more exposed to experimentation, less encumbered by tradition, and able to reinvent themselves kind of in an American cultural way. They like to kind of respond. And then, so I think the 20th century's writings of that time, Alfie and I and a few other people were looking out for such writings that they're not easily found. They were not easily found because there was no internet. So the only outlet was to go to the library, the National Library, and look and rent and find one or two, and then we will share, and then we try to hoodwink the librarian to order more books, you know. And I read like the Village Voice, other kinds of newspapers, cultural journals. So it's not really just purely poetry, but it's also all the other cultural artifacts that signal the change, like Interview magazine, a lot of things that were very exciting at the time. The advent of MTV. You imagine those are the time when there was no internet, so you really anything new, anything that you really would be excited by. As opposed to now, where you have the internet, I guess there's a certain blasé, like, okay, I can watch this later. I'm not quite sure whether you all are sensitized to new things as heartfelt as it would be for us. I think the very fact that you did not have any choice, that you had to make an effort to find these new things, means that there's I don't know how you all felt, but when you discover something on your own that nobody had listened to or read, you felt that it was your own, right? You felt it was a baby. You felt very like possessive, and you want to be the advocate. So I think that sense of passion, the kind of like nothing is given to you on a platter, unlike these days where things are around you all the time, while there's a wealth of information around you. It takes a lot more effort to find the thing that you like. And it's very more difficult to say that you discover it.
Yeah. It's kind of the thrill of discovery, right?
Yeah.
That you get. Which in a way actually very well describes the way I felt when I first read your poetry. When I first discovered you, this alien artifact that was you. So, but actually the first feeling when I read Pretend I'm Not Here was actually bewilderment. And I think that speaks to the point that actually in some ways, although the 1920s and modernism and post-modernism and all these things were already past.
Yeah.
In Singapore, they hadn't quite arrived.
No.
So I think that was the feeling that I got. And the bewilderment slowly switched to appreciation for me after like maybe 5 years or so, as I begin to understand what you were trying to do. And I think that in some ways encapsulates your reception quite well. But do you think there's a shift? Because I think now we come to the second part of the story where, as you said, things were beginning to shift after Pretend I'm Not Here. And from then on to now, I feel like there has been a tremendous shift in like the acceptance of this kind of poetry. And of course, you winning the prize also signals a big shift.
But Desmond Conn winning in 2016?
16.
Yeah. I mean, he was a friend. He was also a colleague in the 80s. Yeah. I mean, these are the signs. But again, I would say that that's because we are all in the same circle of literary clique. But I think the majority of people out there are not that. I still like, they have a certain idea of what poetry should be. And I would not try to delude myself thinking that this means I have arrived. Yeah. I would like to think that there's a lot more work to be done, and literature and poetry is still seen as something that to be tolerated by most people out there. I would say that the younger generation, meaning anyone that's younger than me, are very much more receptive, and because you all are more worldly and more like very international. You literally would be educated overseas, so your exposure to other ways of looking at narratives, meaning in Singapore we like to pursue a certain kind of narrative and you can't really stray either. You may suffer some consequences, but I mean literary wise, I don't mean anything else. Yeah, so I think that the young generations are not going to take the dominant narrative as the default. You would want to question and interrogate and make your own fate, and I think that's the beauty of the plurality of styles that now you see in this generation. I mean, with the new Singapore poetries that was edited by Ko Ji Leong and Marilyn Tan, gave a good sense of the next generation of poets. Yeah.
So you talked about language poetry, I guess, with capital L, right? And we've talked about the death of the author just now as well. So for me, I think I would identify these things as traits of post-structuralism.
Yes.
But obviously this is something that the layman wouldn't understand. And just now you talked about how the average Singaporean, for example, still has really fixed notions of what poetry is. So perhaps could you try explaining post-structuralism to the layman?
When people ask me to explain theories, it's just a critical theory, right? And I would just say that in a layman's sense, as I do to my creative arts program mentees, I say that maybe don't write just because you feel like it. Maybe get a sense of your tradition that you're writing into. Okay, so I will explain the 20th century as the fulcrum of where poetry shifted. So I think before that you'll be writing Victorian, very 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 received forms, like what Hao Guang likes to use, received forms. But I think with the advent of the Industrial Revolution, you start realizing that it empowers that every man, that poetry does not have to be about doesn't have to extol elevated figures, about heroes, and so everything becomes, it's possible to write about the dog, the cat, the red wheelbarrow. So the 20th century tells you it empowers the people who are not necessarily heroes or martyrs and everything. With that comes the World Wars. The World War, partly a sense of a disappointment in the human endeavor and everything. And then sometimes I'm just generalizing here. Okay, please don't take my words like as if they are the way to only approach this. So structuralism came in because the world is hungering for structure, right? Like because Cold War, so everything has to be, and of course industrialization. Countries want to produce, and so structures are a way to understand and to grow and to progress. Somehow, that's why in the 50s, and of course in Asia, Singapore will be later. I guess that's what happens with they start realizing the side effects of industrialization, and that's where post-structuralism came in. The idea of like looking at industrialization and structuralism and realizing came at the expense of certain values, like what you see now, climate change. So I see post-structuralism as a way to understanding. There are waves of human endeavors that respond to the previous one, and then in that way you will understand poetries or any other kind of art form as a social reflection of the changes of those times. So anything that is post, including language poetry, is to interrogate the structures that came before it, and figuring out why that it formed its own fascist and authoritarian ways of looking at it, and then you start realizing you have to destroy it or reconfigure it like a Lego block and start building it differently. And that's when post-structuralists would want to interrogate the ways of the world that we are now living in. Like, is it that in order to progress you need to have certain things like coal, like for fossil fuels. Now you so those are structures that I guess nowadays we don't necessarily take them as that this is you need to have that in order to progress. Yeah, so I don't know how this relates to literature. All I can say is that as someone who writes in these times, it's good to know into what traditional cultures you're writing into, either in response to or in alignment with, so that you understand again. You contextualize yourself in this changing world, and whether you want to take on a certain cause, like maybe like I know there's this thing called eco-poetics and stuff. Are you riding on it, meaning you actually just latch onto it, but not really contextualize it against the changes of the world? Then therefore sometimes you can tell when a collection, I just keep it to poetry, you can tell when a collection is on the surface really trendy or really echoes the issues of the day, but actually there's nothing underneath it in terms of new revolution, new ideas. Yeah. I don't know again whether I answered your question, but that's how I would explain post-structuralist to a layman who say that what the hell are you writing about? Yeah.